Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, before we dig into all the great stuff the Kraken have been up to this week and any future questions we have about them, I have one question for you. How much money would it take to get you to stand up on top of a moving Zamboni, a la what Macklemore was considering trying to do while shooting his music video during the first intermission of one of the Kraken games this past week?
Oof, considering the potential downsides of that, I mean, that could get pretty ugly if you slip off the top. As I think Macklemore realized, as he got 1 foot up there and he's just like, I don't think I'm going to do this. I don't know. Let's see. I mean, talking money, are we talking in terms of, because we also got the other, one of the other minority owners of the Kraken, Marshawn Lynch, in here introducing Lenny Wilkins as the hero of the game. But he said, he donating 32 bandages to his charity. So how many bandages would it take? I'd probably need a lot of bandages.
Yes.
If I decided to hop up there. So I don't know, maybe 32 bandages. We'll call it that.
Okay, there we go. I was going to say, I think I could do it as long as I could start off on the top before the Zamboni got going. If I could lay down, then it's just like, all right, you're like standing up on, the top of a car. Like, we've all done that before, right? Like, it's not so bad once you're already up there. It's the getting up there while it's moving that becomes difficult, I think. That's where Macklemore went wrong.
Should have just said standing up there from the start, because he started off in the little seat like they have you out, when you're just riding the Zamboni, and he kind of worked his way up. He moved like 1 step higher. You got to start at the top and then just keep moving lower, even though I guess that it doesn't have the same effect for the music video.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. You pretend you're just on like a rickety old roof and you just go with it, I guess. All right, here we go. It's still just one of the things that was funny to me about this past week, that you're just like, this is going on.
Yeah,
that's
the things you don't think you're gonna see it when you go to a hockey game, but hey, surprises all the time.
It's one of the things that makes the Seattle Kraken so much better than the other 31 teams around the league. None of them are having stuff like this happen during games, before games. You know what I mean? Like, only us. All right, I absolutely love it, RJ. Lots of great stuff to talk about with the Kraken this week. Get to talk about their performance these last couple games since they've been back in Seattle. Obviously, that's looked pretty fantastic for them. We're going to be looking ahead to the playoffs a little bit later on. We're going to start looking at, maybe how they've been performing against playoff teams, so we can start judging maybe where the Kraken are at as far as everything is concerned. Maybe we'll talk about some other stuff, and then, obviously picking up all the stuff from the games, talking about Gru, Maddie, all that good stuff. But I think we got to start with the dad's trip stories, RJ, because that's the other fun thing that's been happening around the Kraken this past week. It's having all the dads and mentors in town and getting to hear, hopefully some funny stories about everybody.
Yes, it has been such a treat to have the dads and mentors around. You can tell the players are all feeling great having them around and getting to know, the other dads. A lot of players, too. This is their first dad's trip. We've talked to a number of them where they haven't experienced this before. So it's really great for them. I know they were originally planning to maybe do something like this last season, but of course, with COVID, it just wasn't really possible. It wasn't a reality given the time that all happened. So it's just great for everyone, and also just this is as loose, as jovial as I've seen the locker room at any point this season. So it's a treat, not just for the players, but of course for us, the media, and for the fans also. I mean, it's been a pleasure to kind of share some of those sound bites with you and share some of those quotes. But thankfully, in podcast form, I can go a little bit deeper than what I had the chance to do just over Twitter, the last few days. I mean, I'll start with probably the best comment, this one coming from Darren Eberle. And this one I did tweet out, but he was asked, is there anything about Jordan that, maybe we don't know that you could share? And he said, you might not know that he thinks he's a good guitar player, but the worst part about it is he's learning to sing, which, man, that, insult there, but
double whammy too. Like,
I know.
Insults both of them, the guitar playing and the singing.
Yeah, well, Darren Eberle did say that he plays guitar and definitely asserted that he's the better guitar player in the family.
Okay.
So I guess Jordan's got a ways to go. But good to know that about Jordan Eberle. And there are a lot of Kraken with some musical talent too. I mean, you could get a really good, heck, singing, get a good karaoke night going. You could even have a little Kraken band, I think.
Yeah, that would be something, right? I mean, I think we all need to band together and try to make that happen. Just everybody will start a like a change.org petition or something. See what we can do. Try to get just one YouTube video out, just like an overproduced mess of a music video, all of Macklemore on top of a Zamboni, and we'll no, I'm just kidding. And we'll see what we can do with that, because I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And hey, you know what? The Kraken are about to go to San Jose. I keep thinking of my memories, growing up as a Sharks fan, and one of the best things they ever did was these holiday videos that they would do every year. They had just priceless holiday videos. I think the most famous of which would be Holiday Sweater, which was a song. They did a little music video for it. I don't know, maybe next time the holidays roll around, you utilize their musical talents. Just something to think about.
Definitely, for sure. Who else do we get to hear from?
All right, so we also got to hear from Maddie Beniers and his dad Bob, so that was really cool. And I like this. Jordan Eberle said, you can usually pick out whose dad is who. And there's little things that you can gather, before you're even introduced as, oh, this is this guy's dad. Maddie said that. I guess he and Eberle kind of correctly guessed each other's dads. And he was asked, is there anyone else that you just know, like, okay, yeah, that's his dad. He said also Bjorky. So he said Bjorky looks a lot like his dad. So Mr. Bjorkstrand, I guess, looks a lot like Oliver. I didn't get a chance to see him, I guess, today. I was looking around for the different dads. For my money, like the one that looks most like his son, I think, is Mr. McCann.
Okay.
Like he's got that Jared McCann face. The resemblance is pretty clear.
Awesome. That is, yeah. I can't wait to see like the big picture that they all took today out on the ice together. Were they paired up with their dad, so like we'll be able to look at them all?
No, they had the players in front and the dads in the back, so they weren't paired up at all.
That's okay though, because then it just becomes one of those like activity book matching games where you have to draw the line from, what I mean?
Yes. No, I mean, it's a fun exercise. I don't know how much of the jerseys were showing, because the dads, I think, were each given a jersey for their corresponding player. They had the player and the number on the back. So that was really helpful too for us, just to know who is who, as they're walking around. So that was pretty cool. And then finally, we got to talk to Morgan and Craig Geeky, so his dad Craig. And I mean, this one lasted maybe twice, three times as long as the other media availabilities. We had a lot of fun chatting with those two. And just some fun tidbits there. I mean, there's the stuff that I tweeted out about, Craig saying that Morgan's probably a little bit better in COD than he is in Mario Kart, or sorry, Mario Kart, as he said.
Yes.
Yeah. But then of course, Morgan interjecting, I think that's saying how good I am at COD. And that was interesting to learn, because actually I found out, and I actually stayed a little bit afterward just to chat with Craig and Morgan about that. The Geeky family, like the men, they play Call of Duty together pretty regularly, with a lot of the cross-platform stuff and, being able to play a lot easier online. It's something that they do pretty regularly just to stay in touch. And, they're all kind of at different places, with, Connor, playing in juniors, and Morgan in Seattle, and of course, mom and dad back home, and Noah, playing baseball. It's hard to kind of, get together and stay in contact, but that's an important way that they do it.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic thing. Like video games has always been one of those things that I've thought is perfect for that online gaming together. Not the first sports family where I've heard that kind of being the story. I think the very first one that I really remember kind of blowing up was actually Rick Fox, the basketball player. Back in the day, he was traded cross country and to stay connected with his younger son. They played World of Warcraft back in the, like, we're going back in the day here, but they played World of Warcraft together for that same exact reason. So it's really nice to hear that, despite everything, they're kind of able to still be able to have fun and play and hang out together. I really like hearing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's great. And I asked them too, who's the most competitive at Call of Duty, because I know we both know things can get a little heated there, and I think they both agreed it was Connor Geeky.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep. So
It's
interesting tidbit for any was it Arizona he got drafted by?
yes, the Coyotes.
Yeah, like any Coyotes fans, that or anyone interested there that may be listening. Yeah, Connor Geeky, I guess, is the most competitive of them. I mean, hey, he was also the highest draft pick, so maybe
Oh,
there's something to that.
oh, just gonna casually drop that against Morgan
I'm
there.
just saying.
Just saying, it's facts. It's just facts. That's all I'm stating. It's
Yeah.
just facts. You know what? That works as kind of a nice segue. Was that everything from the dad's
I
pick?
got a few more things
All right,
if
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't
Let's do
mind.
it.
Keep
Yeah,
going. So I also I had to ask because they were talking about like how were the car rides home and everything,
right.
after games growing up. And I, Morgan said that well, it depends how the game went. There were a couple ultimatums in there, but it's all well worth it. I know. And then Piper's like, ultimatums.
Yes. What's that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting hearing about, because in just about all these cases, the players' dads were their coach for long stretches of time as a kid, and just
Mm,
hearing the differences in kind of how you would approach that. Because when you have a kid who's just so gifted, so talented, but also you want to make sure that they're putting in the work, it creates some different dynamics and everything. And I thought it was interesting that Craig Geeky was talking about about when Morgan was 10 or so. He had to kind of lay off a little bit and kind of pick your battles as far as being that tough love hockey parent. And he said, I realized around when he was 10, like, if I didn't do that, otherwise we were going to lose him as a hockey player.
mm-hmm.
And just kind of bringing that love of the game back in, and realizing, putting things in perspective, that this is about still having fun. And I think that's something that Morgan talked about as being really important. Um, and of course, Morgan Geeky, and his wife, they're going to have a baby soon. And so
Mm-hmm.
he's asked about like what, lessons and bits of wisdom do you take from your dad that you're going to, pass on to being a father yourself. And I thought he had a really good answer there. I mean, he started off with, some tough love here and there, but lots of fun. And he started, I said, I would say just kind of let the kids just do whatever they want. Well, sorry, no, that's not the way to say that. What he meant was that, let them pursue their passions, and,
Right.
Don't kind of try and pigeonhole them into a certain thing that you want them to do. And that's why he feels like he was ultimately able to be such a well-rounded person too, because we know that Morgan Geeky's got lots of different interests even outside of hockey.
Yeah.
Music and video games and all this
Pizza
stuff.
Hut.
He's a very
Yeah.
well-rounded Pizza Hut. He's a very well-rounded person.
Yeah.
And he said that he thinks that really helped, that that his dad always took a shine to his interests, whatever it was. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just the sport, that you try and push him into. And that's something he's going to try and do for his child. Be there for when you need them, but kind of help them grow on their own, and be their own person.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a lot of what really our parents did too, right? But us through
Yes.
like the homeschooling parts of our journeys and everything, and how we ended up here doing this, is very much fueled from that. So yeah, I can say I give that my stamp of approval for what that's worth.
Sure. You don't end up, doing anything like that without, this love and support from your parents. So,
Yeah.
and then one more thing, you mentioned Pizza Hut. I had to ask, like, was that like a reward for, like, where did that start?
Yeah.
Was that like a reward for good games on road trips back? Like, where did that originate? And Craig said that actually he's like, I had no idea about that. That was like completely after he left the house. That was totally off the cuff. It just like surprised me when that whole thing came up. So no, it wasn't back to his childhood. This was,
All right.
Morgan Geeky being his own man as an adult,
Yep.
finding Pizza Hut, and loving Pizza Hut. So I kind of, I was gonna say, got to the bottom of that, but I still don't know exactly how that started. But it was definitely after he had moved out. His dad didn't know.
All right. Well, that still gives us a nice like kind of range now. We can try to pin down when this fascination and love affair with Pizza Hut began for Morgan Geeky. Every year we'll just get like one more tidbit that we can just kind of slowly start narrowing this down, and maybe 10 seasons from now we'll have the complete picture and we can look back on it. So really good stuff there. I liked all the stuff that we got to see, even just like from what the Kraken were putting out on social media, what you or the other reporters around the team were putting out on social media. Loved seeing Grubauer's dad kind of give the little bit of the speech after the game last night. That I thought that was really fun, right before Grubauer was given the Davy Jones hat. I just think this whole idea and weekend has just been really, really cool.
For sure. I'd love to see this, and I know they've got to be planning some kind of mom's trip as well. I know that's
Hmm.
something that that people are interested in, and it's funny. Bob Beniers was asked about, like, they have a really tight knit family, and so, like, are the
Yeah.
others jealous that you get to go do this and they don't? And he said, "Oh, absolutely. Like, my wife is already emailing everybody asking when the mother's event is,
Yes.
and that Maddie's sister, even, she was is with the she had the Bruins trip,
Hmm.
for where she's playing. It's a siblings trip, and so she's asking, where's the siblings trip going to
Yeah.
happen? It's definitely something that the other families members want to make happen.
Yep, yep, definitely, and I think we all want to see that too. It was really cool, even just during the game, seeing them cut to the box with all of them up there in it wearing the jerseys, so you could start, anytime they zoomed in on them like celebrating after a goal, you could start matching them up and stuff. It was a lot of fun for everybody watching that Red Wings game. We talked a lot about the Geeky family, and we'll go ahead and use that as a segue to go into talking about these games from this past week, RJ, because Kraken started off this past week since our last episode playing in Winnipeg to finish off that road trip that they had, that post All-Star break road trip, and the whole Geeky family was there, including Connor, who plays for the Winnipeg Ice in the WHL. Got to see him there. I'm wondering if it's just has to do with length of hair in the family, maybe the competitiveness, or just being a higher draft pick. Connor's got the longest hair. Maybe that's just how it works. What do you think?
Yeah, possibly. I know Connor's definitely been blessed in the hair department more than the others in the family there. So maybe that does have something to do with it. But yeah, I mean, it was cool to see the whole Geeky family there for that game in Winnipeg, and then of course, Craig getting to come down for the dad's trip. But yeah, you can tell Morgan was playing really hard, in
Mm-hmm.
that game, definitely wanting to play well. He got a great assist,
Yep.
on John Hayden's goals. So I mean, it really is this motivating factor, and I mean, it shouldn't be surprising, right? I think
Yeah.
any one of us in whatever it is that we do, we have a parent there coming to support you. You want to do your best, um, and yeah, unfortunately, the Kraken not able to get the win out of that game, but you know. It's a shootout. I mean, we could talk about those difficulties, but hey, it is the skills competition at the end of the day.
Yeah, the bottom line is, coming off of last week when we were kicking off the deep dive, wondering, is this like the worst week we've had all season long? Bottom line is, since then, Kraken gone 2-0-1. Right, they've picked up 5 of a possible 6 points, and yes, it includes that shootout. We can get to that the shootout discussion maybe in a moment. We can kind of bring that back up afterwards. But I feel like just looking at the week as a whole, just two things really stood out to me that I want to talk about before we kind of go game by game. The first one is Philipp Grubauer. We had talked about him. It seemed like he was starting to kind of reclaim that starting role. Very much looked that way throughout the course of this week, and he's just kept it rolling. Philipp Grubauer has been solid and consistent and really spectacular game in, game out now for a whole week.
I was going to say beyond solid. I think spectacular. Certainly at times he's been, and if you look from the start of the new year, he's been one of the best goalies in the NHL, and he's just kept that going. You get the sense that he's just playing on his game. There's nothing that can rattle him at this point, and he is clearly the Kraken's best goalie right now. And I think the coaching staff absolutely realizes that. I mean, you have
Right.
4 straight starts for Grubauer now. I mean, he hadn't had 3 straight starts at any point before the season. I mean, he just had sorry, he had yeah, 3, 1,
Yeah.
2, 3, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an unprecedented run for him this season, and he's really taken over, as the team's starting goalie.
Yeah, and as he should. We've finally got a Kraken goaltender, 900 save percentage. Like, that's awesome. You can see it when you look at his win-loss record. I mean, he's almost back up to 500, 8, 9, and 3 so far. I mean, that's starting to look way healthier than it was there for a little while. The goal support's starting to come in for him. Like, it's not only has he been playing really well and keeping the Kraken in some close games, but also he's now starting to get some goal support. Things are starting to normalize a little based on, versus what they were and had been through so much of this season. And I'm just so happy for him, so happy for the club. And it's going to be interesting to see, goaltenders, they all go on hot and cold streaks. That's just the nature of the position, whether it's because of burnout issues or whatever it is. That is just natural. And I'm not saying Grubauer is anywhere close to kind of coming off this hot streak, But it's going to be interesting to me now, having seen Hackstall go ahead and make that shift, ride the hot hand with Grubauer now after kind of doing a similar situation with Martin Jones, if maybe he's quicker to make the switch next time after he maybe wasn't totally that fast on making the switch this time from Martin Jones to Grubauer. It'll be interesting to see if maybe Hackstall learns that lesson of kind of like what to recognize or what to see with these two players particularly, because it's different for all goaltenders. So as a coach, you got to learn that. I am interested to see if, 2-3 weeks from now, Grubauer starts cooling off a little bit, Jones comes in and looks good in a game, if we see like a big full switch at that point, or if we see something kind of slow develop like we did here.
Right. And it's hard to say what we're going to see. And it's tough because Dave Hackstall, he has a season of experience coaching Philipp Grubauer, but not Martin Jones. And so
Yep.
maybe identifying some of those signs of burnout is a little bit more difficult when you haven't had the chance to do it before. But I do wonder, where they're going to end up kind of settling here, because basically it was just ride Jones as much as you can, and then ride Grubauer as much as you can. So I think ideally you'd probably want to settle into a balance where you're having maybe 2 games one guy, 1 game another, 2 games one guy, 1 game another, so on and so forth, as you have the back-to-backs and everything. You don't want to have 6 games of one guy, 1 game of the other, and then 6 games of the other guy. You just don't want that. So eventually they're going to have to settle into more of a rhythm, but that's going to require, I think, Martin Jones to look a little steadier in net than he has been recently.
Yeah, and we'll see when he has the opportunity to do that too, right? Because that becomes something. I'm with you that traditionally, certainly during a regular season, you want more of that kind of 2-1 kind of split. Maybe throughout a week, you get 2 performances from your starter, 1 from the backup. But whenever you're dealing with a coach who's got to deal with this situation where it's just kind of riding the hot hand netminder wise, and the Kraken are looking like a potential playoff team, or at like a playoff team, and we'll talk about that more later on. I mean, do you still want to do that? Obviously you want to manage burnout. You don't want to start the playoffs with somebody who's played like their last 12 games and now they've got to go into a playoff series and try to deal with that situation. But at some point, do you think that going ahead and just doing it the way Hackstall is kind of doing it, where it's just ride them as long as you can kind of thing, does that maybe fit better for a playoff series when you are going to just stick with one guy?
I mean, I do think that's basically what you have to do in the playoffs. But you want to time it to the point where you're not having somebody tired from having played the last however many games. Like you said, it's a delicate balancing act in the regular season, because you're also juggling, okay, who's my better goalie right now? Do I sacrifice the chance at a win because I want this certain balance that I want to have? It's tough. And also because Grubauer has missed so much time, it's like, does that not count toward burnout because he's been injured? Or how is the human body going to respond? It's such a difficult question. And I mean, one thing we haven't even addressed yet is you might have a third goalie on the roster soon. You might have Chris Driedger. I mean, and this is a development from practice today that I think we should talk about. Is that in one net, Martin Jones was getting all the reps, in the near net, but in the far net at practice today, Chris Driedger got most of the reps instead of Philipp Grubauer. And now, of course, that makes sense. This doesn't mean anything for Grubauer. It basically just means he played last night.
Right.
You want to give him a little bit of a breather. And so that makes all the sense in the world. But it does highlight that Chris Driedger is really ramping up. I mean, this is the most that I have seen him practice and get action here. And he came out actually earlier before practice. He was the first goalie on the ice, and he got most of the work in practice in that net too. So he's really starting to ramp up, and you've got to start thinking about whether it's Ron Francis or Dave Hackstall, what is going to be the answer here, because you may have a third goalie to juggle.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a really interesting situation. I mean, I know it's tough, and I'm putting you kind of like in a weird spot here, but do you have any sense of when you think we might see Driedger? Like, do you think the Hayden move of setting him down is to free up the roster spot for him?
It's not to free up the roster spot for him right away, because if that's what you're going for, then there's no reason to do it right then.
Yeah.
You can just keep Hayden on the roster because Driedger hasn't come back. He hasn't been activated. Right. So it's not for that. I think it's mostly protecting Hayden from waivers and banking some cap space, because with Driedger coming back, cap space is something you're going to have to think about. But watching him today in practice, he looks like there's no restrictions basically as far as his movement. He's stretching out to make saves. He looks like Chris Driedger of last season in practice, where that hasn't always been the case as he's been kind of easing through. So he's got to be close. I've got to think he's close. I do think there's really no urgency to have him officially come back before the trade deadline on
Right.
March 2nd. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was suddenly healthy March 3rd. And activated, because then there's no roster size limit.
Right.
You don't have to worry about the roster space. I'm not suggesting the Kraken would ever fudge anything like that, like, or any NHL team. They'd never fudge when exactly a guy was healthy, for roster and cap concerns. But it wouldn't surprise me if he was ready to go on March 3rd.
Yep, and then as you talked about, then things become really interesting as far as what Dave Haxtell wants to do, starting the goalies. As far as I'm concerned, RJ, as far as I can remember, I can't remember a time when an NHL team has tried to go, 2-3 months having 3 kind of active goalies on the roster and trying to manage that workload. Like, I don't know that there's really precedent for something like that, especially for a team looking to make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history and try to have a good showing there.
Right. Anytime you're putting a goalie into this, you're in the thick of a playoff race too. So it's not like you can ease Chris Driedger back into this with some games of little consequence. These are going to be very, very important games. Arguably at the time, the most important game the franchise has ever played. And you're easing Chris Driedger back into it with those games. So it's going to be very difficult to do. And I think ultimately it's going to come down to, who do you feel more confident in, Martin Jones or Chris Driedger? I think Grubauer has taken over as the starter, but now I think the backup job is potentially open here.
Yeah.
And Driedger could come in and swoop and steal that job away.
Really interesting stuff. Can't wait to see kind of what the next week may hold for that through practices and everything else. The other big story from this past week that I wanted to talk about, RJ, is Maddie Beniers. Because Maddie Beniers has looked really, really, really good, especially these last 2 games at home in Seattle against both the Flyers and the Red Wings. Maddie Beniers, it just looks like since he's come back post All-Star break, after the Tyler Myers hit, kind of knocked him out for a couple games there, it just looks like every game back he's gotten more and more confident. He's trying more and more things to the point now where we're seeing him pull off moves that we've never really seen him pull off at the NHL level yet, offensively, as far as driving the lane, making, getting himself put into some isolated positions, making some fantastic reads with his vision and his passing ability. I mean, he is playing out of his mind right now. He's finally starting to pick up some points again, which is great. Hasn't quite gotten the goals yet, although they have to be coming given how well he's playing. I mean, what do you think about Maddie Beniers right now? Or is he going to just kind of go back on a tear now and kind of wrap up this Calder race, especially now that like a Logan Thompson's iffy injury-wise and been out of the equation?
It certainly seems like that's where it's headed. And I agree with your assessment that he does look different. He looks more confident these last couple games. I mean, you have the narrative of basically Maddie Beniers kind of hitting that rookie wall that we all know exists for a lot of players. And then these last couple games, it looks like he's just kind of busted through it now. Maybe took a few attempts to get through it, but now he's past it. And he's playing with a lot more confidence, playing with, a lot more willingness to try things and a lot more. I think he's seeing the ice better. But who would disagree with the two of us? Dave Haxtell.
Oh, Dave Haxtell. Okay. That's an important person if they're going to disagree with us.
Definitely. And so I kind of want to bring this up to discuss, what he had to say about it, because I think, I certainly trust his hockey mind, better than either of ours. And so I kind of want to weigh this idea of, okay, are we wrong or is Dave Haxtell wrong on this? Because we've asked him about this both last night and then today in practice. And he has kind of kept with the same point that basically he's like, I don't see anything different in Maddie Beniers' game. Nothing has changed about how he's played over this time. He's just kind of kept plugging away. He's been defensively responsible the whole time. The points haven't always been coming, but that's how it is in this league. Sometimes it becomes harder to score around this time of year. Sometimes you don't get the bounces, and that he's been playing basically the exact same way, but just now he's starting to kind of get rewarded for that stuff. And if you basically plug at it long enough and keep being strong defensively and keep turning the puck back, then you will eventually get rewarded. And that's what's happening to him now. So is Dave Haxtell wrong, or are we wrong? Or I guess the other alternative is Dave Haxtell kind of just trying to play down this narrative of the rookie wall and praise his, his rookie center for staying as responsible defensively and kind of preaching that for his team. You can never know what he really thinks privately, but what do you think is going on here?
That's more so what I feel like is going on there, because some of this is stuff that we've heard, and it's not untrue, right? Like, Maddie has played really solid defensively, and he's been responsible, and all of that stuff's been there. I talked about it last night on the post game after the Red Wings game, because we're recording this on Sunday, everybody. I know it's coming out Monday for all of you, but this is Sunday for us right now. I remember being there for Maddie's first ever morning skate at CPA, and it was clear watching him as a then 19-year-old that he just had that extra something special, that it factor that only a certain number of people can have. And he saw the ice better, and he was making plays or even attempting to try to do things just in drills that nobody else on the Seattle Kraken was doing, that made me think, oh, okay, this guy's legit, and he's going to be ready a lot faster than anybody thought. And oh yeah, he's going to be like the true leader of this team for a long, long time. And so I think for Dave Haxtell, who is seeing him every practice, every morning skate, in and out the building all the time, every day, yeah, him doing that in games doesn't seem like anything crazy, because he's been seeing this from him all along, through development camps, through everything. He's been seeing this kind of player in Maddie Beniers. We haven't necessarily always seen it this consistently, or maybe Maddie not pushing the issue as strongly in games, but I don't think it's wrong to say, like, well, yeah, I mean, he's just kind of, this is just Maddie. It's what he's been doing all along, because he has been doing it all along in and around the team when Dave Haxtell would be seeing him there. I do want to bring up, though, Dave Haxtell mentions a lot at all different points of the season. Well, it's a tough time this time of year, or games get tough this time of year. He was saying that back at like the end of November. Is that just like what he says all year long? It's just, he's like in July, he's like, you know what? I mean, hockey season really starts here. This is a tough time of year for the guys.
I think you said that, or to the effect, basically where it just gets tougher as the season goes on.
Yeah.
But that's something that, yeah, he does bring up a lot. Basically, it's going to get tougher to score, guys. It's going to get tougher to score goals and to put up points. And that's something that, kind of consistently he does preach, that,
Yeah.
It's never easy tomorrow as it was yesterday. If you're trying to score goals in this league, that's kind of the talking point. But I mean, hey, he did say to us, I think it was at the end of November, he said basically, once November's over, I'm not going to tell you lineup stuff anymore. Yeah. So I guess December is when it really starts and really gets tough. Although he's been nice enough with a lot of the lineup stuff since.
Yeah. And, there is definitely something to be said for that as like a message, not just for hockey, but in general, of like looking back at what you've accomplished, drawing strength from that, understanding then how to tackle future obstacles that come in your way. Like, I appreciate that from that perspective. But yeah, it's just funny, because I feel like for months now we've been hearing like, well, this is the toughest time of year. It just keeps going. It makes me want to, though, go and look up if goal scoring numbers drop as seasons progress. Or
I know research has been done on this.
Yeah, I know. I'm just curious as to what it may say, because it's not something I anticipated talking about before we started recording this podcast.
I know we could have easily looked this up, but now it's difficult.
Yes, to try to do it on the spot. The bottom line, though, is Maddie Beniers looks fantastic. Whether he's breaking through a rookie wall, maybe he's shaking off the injury that he was dealing with there that caused him to miss going to the All-Star game. Maddie Beniers is back, and he looks fantastic out there. And he's such a special player, and he's going to be a part of this Kraken group for such a long time, and I'm so happy about it.
Yeah, even when you were talking about, the first morning skate, with Beniers once he joined the Kraken, and those first few practices and games just gave me warm and fuzzy memories, let me tell you.
I know, right? It's all good stuff. Anything else you want to mention from the games this past week, RJ, before we can kind of move forward and start looking ahead to playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that we talked about on post game, but I want to just talk about a little bit on here. And the first one is kind of the power play looking a little bit different, and Yanni Gorgo in net front. And so we talked about this on the last post game, but I wanted to kind of give it a little bit more of a thorough review with we had been calling for, I forget whether it was last week's podcast or the podcast before, Yanni Gourde to kind of move to that net front spot on the power play, and just that he's seemed naturally very good there.
Yep.
And that's something that Dave Haxtell ended up doing, moved him to the
Yep.
net front on the power play unit. And I mean, he's looked fantastic there since he's been there. And so a couple days ago at morning skate, Haxtell was asked about it. And the way that I phrased it on post game was a little bit like kind of dismissive. I was like, Haxtell's like, yeah, he's looks really good there, and he kind of made it clear that maybe you should have been there a long time ago. Like, yeah, maybe you should have. If he's, like I said, if you're watching practice and morning skates like you guys have, meaning us, the media, you've seen him out there in front of the net tipping 100, 200 pucks every single practice. He's like, he's that guy.
Yeah.
And so it made it seem kind of obvious. But after going back, because I want to go back and re-listen to that and see, like, okay, it doesn't really sound that obvious. Yeah. But one thing that came out to me afterward was that Haxtell was saying that a reason that he didn't have Yanni Gourde there, and I think this is a legit reason in the past, is that he was trying to manage his minutes. And someone like Yanni Gourde, who especially in that new line with Tolvanen and Bjorkstrand, they're actually getting more minutes, at even strength than he was getting before in his previous role. And then also the fact that he kills penalties, and he's a very active penalty killer. And also Haxtell mentioned just how intense he plays, the intensity with which he plays the game. Those minutes probably wear on someone like Yanni Gourde. Yeah. Not all minutes are created equal.
Yes.
Yanni Gourde's minutes, he packs a lot more energy into that. So you have to really monitor that and watch his minutes. And so that was his big concern earlier this season. He's already kind of playing maybe, at the limit of what you want him playing. And even though he can contribute there on the power play, it might be kind of stretching him too thin, especially that early in the season when you want someone rested. You got to think about the long run. So I do think that was a legitimate concern. But hey, if you're starting to break that out in the middle of the season, then it's less of a strain on him, I think.
Right, when you're starting to look at things and it's like, all right, there's 30 games left before you start looking at the postseason. There, I'm looking at the average time on ice for forwards right now. He's third on the team behind Wenberg and Jaden Schwartz. So playing at exactly 17 minutes per game. On the dot, Yanni Gourde right now. I certainly think he is somebody who's kind of proven in the past, or certainly come playoff time, that he's capable of handling maybe a little bit more than that if needed, if the team decides that they need it. And it's actually down almost an entire minute and a half from last season for him. Last year he averaged 18:29 per game.
Interesting.
Yanni Gourde. So it's actually down pretty significant. Like, that's a big drop, a minute and a half for somebody like that. So for year over year. But yeah, that is an interesting thing, and I understand that as well.
Yeah, and just to anybody who's listening to this, if you are lucky enough to go to an open Kraken practice and you're just watching practice, stick around after stretch and watch Yanni Gourde just be in front of the net tipping pucks, for a solid 15 minutes after almost every practice. It's a joy to watch.
Yeah, definitely. We've mentioned it a couple times now, RJ, whether it was talking about how you handle the goalies or minutes when it comes to somebody like Yanni Gourde. And the Kraken getting back to their winning ways have certainly made this, a more palatable discussion than maybe it would have been last week. But starting to look ahead to the postseason and kind of how things might shake out for the Kraken as they get closer and closer to being there, as they continue to win, rack up points. They're putting themselves into a pretty solid position as far as what they can expect come the end of the year. And really what that would be is a postseason berth for the first time in franchise history. The question, though, then becomes, like, how ready do we think they are for it? That's been a lot of the discussion around as far as trade deadline. What do they need to add? Should they be adding anything? Do you just let it ride? Do you start, do you maybe sell off somebody like a Carson Soucy? Some of those questions have been answered in this past week, as we saw Ryan O'Reilly get traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Off the board, that was somebody a lot of people were really interested in potentially bringing in. Sounds like Jonathan Toews will not be moved given the personal statement that he put out. So Jonathan Toews kind of off the board. That leaves really nobody else as far as bringing in that kind of like two-way veteran center who's been there, done that everybody was kind of looking for, that we all seemingly agreed might be the only thing that they would do as far as making a move. So you start looking at, okay, this Kraken roster, the one that we've been seeing, is going to be the Kraken roster more or less that then enters the postseason. or is going to be battling late into the postseason there. And you had an interesting thought and started looking into some things, RJ. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you about what, that might look like come mid-April, late April.
Right. So basically, you're looking at the Kraken and preparing for a playoff run and getting practice in different ways. And one thing that I kind of looked up and thought about is, well, how have they done recently against potential playoff opponents? And it's the Kraken. I realized they haven't had a whole lot of practice against those teams. I was basically, how this started as I was lying awake in bed at night after a Kraken game. I always have trouble winding down and getting to sleep. And I was trying to answer the question, okay, when was the last time the Kraken beat a potential playoff opponent, someone who they could see, in the first couple rounds of the playoffs this year? And I even looked it up, and I'll even do a wider definition of potential playoff opponent. Let's talk top 12 team in the West.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's Arizona and above.
Yeah.
So that's
pretty
a
generous.
pretty wide. Yeah, pretty generous. And the last time the Kraken beat one of those teams, top 12 team in the West, is Edmonton, January 3rd. So that's a long time ago. And I looked at their schedule. I'm like, all right, well, when's their next opportunity to beat another one? And the next chance they're going to have is March 5th against Colorado. So you're talking about a 2-month stretch where they will not have beaten a potential playoff opponent. I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't tell you a ton. Okay, how many of them have they actually played?
Right.
And I think it was only 4 games in that stretch that they even faced off against a potential playoff opponent, a top 12 team in the West. So it wasn't very many. But when you're talking about gearing up for a playoff run, you have to wonder, okay, how much of an indicator is this for what the Kraken look like? And so I looked up a few more numbers, and we'll see if we can kind of infer anything from them. I'm not necessarily saying, these are gonna tell all, but it's just something I was thinking about. So let's expand to just all teams that are currently in a playoff spot right now. Mm-hmm. So all teams in the NHL that are currently in playoff position. So the Kraken started their season 11-3-1 against those teams. Very, very good record against some very good teams. And you kind of had that really hot streak through November, all through there. Remember, they were just running through these great teams. Mm-hmm. But since then, and this is after that Washington Capitals win earlier in the season, they've been 5-10-2 against those teams, against teams currently in playoff position. So it just felt like something anecdotally that I'm like, I feel like they've been, haven't been playing as well against higher competition recently. And the numbers do seem to back that up. On the other hand, I mean, they have been taking care of business against teams that are not currently in playoff position. They are 13-1-1 in their last 15 against non-playoff teams. So they've been absolutely taking care of business against those teams. But I don't know, it does leave me wondering, is this maybe a bad indicator, a bad omen for the playoffs? Or have they just not been getting the opportunity?
Right. So they're definitely kind of not really getting the opportunity. I guess they had one against the Jets and they lost that game in the shootout, which I guess we could go back and talk about the shootout stuff again if we need to. But it's one of those that it's an interesting discussion because I feel like this has almost been a question that we've all been dancing around when it comes to the trade deadline about really how competitive do we think this Kraken team could be come postseason time, and because it's one of those this feels early, especially after everything we experienced last year where the team was not good and they did not win games, and we were all like, okay, you know what, that's fine, we're gonna build through the draft and we're gonna do this the right way and all that stuff, and then lo and behold it's like, oh no, we're just gonna kind of perennially be within 2 points of first place and dancing all around that kind of situation. And here we are looking at a deadline for the first time as potential buyers, trying to bolster a playoff effort. And one of the questions that we haven't just straight up addressed is, what do we think this team is as a playoff team? If you start looking ahead at the playoffs and you say, okay, this club as is walks into the postseason, what are they actually capable of? Are they a cup contender, or is this just one of those, hey, congratulations, you graduated to the playoffs a little bit early, but there's still work to be done situations? And I know it seems early, but that's, I'm Mr. Way Too Early, so I'm totally fine with having this discussion. I think that it's one of those that, and these kind of recent numbers kind of give us that idea of, I think this is a playoff team, but I don't know that it's much more than a maybe winning a first round series playoff team.
Yeah, as it is right now, I think I'm with you. It's tough because if the playoffs started in mid-November or early January, I really do think, if you start a tournament right then and there, the Kraken are legit cup contenders. I think they're among the best teams in the league at that point. They would have been very difficult to beat. And this is the struggle that you've seen with a lot of teams that maybe do well in the regular season, but fail to get it done in the playoffs. I think they're over the last, 4 or 5 years, there are a lot of times where if the playoffs started a month or 2 months or 3 months early, the Leafs are looking at a cup final appearance, what I mean? Just because they're probably one of the best teams in hockey at that time. It's all about timing it out so you are getting hot at the right moment. It's not something that the Kraken or Kraken fans have had to really contend with or think about a lot. But it's something that certainly growing up following the Sharks, it was something that was on everyone's mind all the time. We know this team is good, but are they going to be hot at the right moment? And so it kind of depends there. But looking at this team as it is right now, I don't want to take anything away from their 3 recent wins here against, Detroit, Philly, and Philly. But you look at that Flyers team, they are an absolute mess.
It's awful.
An absolute mess. And so you look at 2 wins against them, one convincing, one not. And I'm tempted to kind of throw that out. You look at Detroit, who was very hot coming into that game, but watching that game, it seemed like a lot of unforced errors from the Red Wings. I don't think they played their best game, just personal assessment. And again, they're not the most talented team. I just want to see the Kraken go out and prove it. And go back to the Kraken's last win before that against Columbus. They're a very bad team.
Yes.
Before that, Vancouver. I mean, I know they've had their issues with Vancouver, but they're kind of a bit of a joke. And you have to go back to kind of New Jersey, January 19th for the last win against a team that you can see is okay. They're a good hockey team. They can make you earn it. So I just want to see the Kraken come out and have a convincing win against a good team. And I just want to see that, to know that they can. They've had convincing wins against teams that I think are not the best, but I just want to see that. But hey, they'll have an opportunity soon. They got San Jose next, and I mean the Sharks aren't very good. They may be missing Timo Meier. It could be another one of those. You just have to screw it up in order to not win. But you got Boston coming up. At home. On Thursday, the 23rd. So, I mean, that's going to be a good measuring stick game. You got Toronto right after. Again, if they can take care of business and just look like they belong against those two, all my concerns with that will be gone. Certainly if they can beat Boston. But I don't know. It's just something that's been in the back of my mind.
Yeah, and I think that that's legitimate. I think that that's been something that people have, like I said, we've all been kind of dancing around it, maybe not wanting to bring it up, maybe not wanting to really acknowledge it or have to think about it, but it is at some point something that has to be discussed and thought about. And I think this point in time, this podcast is the appropriate place to do it as we do look ahead at games at home against a Boston, against a Toronto, before we'll be doing another one of these. And I think that that's, it makes sense to be having the discussion now versus later. And I also say all of this too with the whole, look, we didn't think they were going to be a playoff team before this year. Things happen, things change. We know that this group is talented. We know that this group is deep offensively. They can all score goals. We know that they can, have goaltenders like Grubauer right now, that Grubauer right now is playing like a goaltender that could get you to a conference final, no problem. You know what I mean? Like we've
Yes.
seen that. Like that's the level that Philipp Grubauer is playing at right now. Anything can kind of happen when you get into situations like that. You look at the offensive output that the defense has been able to give all season long, the defensemen, and we don't talk about it so much anymore, but it's still been there. As Alexiak just got a goal last night.
Yeah, we've just gotten used to it as a whole.
Yeah, basically. So there's still lots of things about this team that tell me like, oh yeah, I could see this definitely being a second round team, and then they're going to, maybe it's a 50-50 in the second round sort of situation. But given the way that they have performed recently, going back to the end of January, it, doubts have crept in there. And so it's one of those that, hey, even if it's just we bring this up and that throws it out there into the universe, or it throws it at the team, and then they get motivated to go prove us wrong, or the universe is going to prove us wrong, just like when we said this team wasn't going to be a playoff team before the season kind of thing, right? I'm all for it. I'll look like the fool if it means the Kraken do really well. You know what I mean? Like I'm all on board with being in that situation, but it is one of those that I just felt like should be brought up. And when you told me that you had been thinking about that, I was like, yeah, you know what, this makes sense. I think the time is right to go ahead and talk about it. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting situation come playoff time. Also, just where they're at as far as not just being hot and wanting to enter the postseason kind of hot and getting hot, but also just because of how tight the whole playoff race is for them right now, as far as not just in the division, but potentially then when you start looking at wild cards and everything else. It's going to be a journey here for the next couple months, and it's going to be an exciting one, and I don't want to put like a damper on it at all. We're going to have so much fun going on this journey together. But yeah, it's an interesting situation with this team that is a team that is, they were trying to build the right way, and yet you're here in this spot already. It's different.
It is for sure, but as Dave Haxtell said this morning, get used to it. It's going to be tight going through the rest of the season. Y'all better get used to it. So that's definitely what we have to do. And I'll close by saying I know you can only play the team in front of you.
Yes.
I get that. I know it's thrown around in college football a lot. I feel like I always hear that phrase, and supplies in any sport. But yeah, you can only play the team in front of you.
Right, and you know what? Given the season the Kraken had last year, this is not a bad spot to be in for them, in the sense that they're a team that are beating the teams that are clearly worse than them, and they're taking care of the business there. And then, you know what? You get, you were able to rattle off wins against Toronto and Boston on the road and some other good teams during that stretch. Like, you've proven that you can beat those teams before. The question then becomes, come playoff time, as you're in a 7-game series against a team like that, can you beat them consistently? And that becomes then the next hurdle and that kind of difference. So right now, the only thing we know about the Kraken is that they are definitely better than the teams that we know they are better than. No questions there. They can handle them consistently. That's what your numbers said. And we know that they can beat good teams. The only question is, how consistently can they beat those good teams? And we'll just have to find that out over the rest of this stretch and schedule here. But I'm excited for it. All right.
Yeah, I am too.
With the last little bit we have here, I don't think that it's quite enough time to get into the larger kind of Shane Wright discussion that we were considering. We were holding to see if we were going to have time for. I think that's going to have to be pushed to next week, everybody. I'm sorry, but just sneak peek to next week. We'll be talking about Shane Wright and everything involving him and the roster next season. The thing that I want to talk about is the shootout. We've danced around that a couple times, talked about maybe going back to it. Kraken's record in the shootout this year has not been great, RJ. And part of that is in the minds of many because they have stuck with the same shootout lineup of Jordan Eberle, Ryan Donato, Daniel Sprong. And you look at their success rate this season, and Jordan Eberle is the only one to have scored in a shootout this season, and he is 1 for 3. Donato is 0 for 3, Sprong is 0 and 2. So you're talking about a success rate of 1 out of 8, which is not good considering these are free breakaways against a goaltender, RJ, that you should be able to score on at least 20% of the time.
Yeah, no, those numbers are not very good. And it's been a problem for the Kraken whenever the shootout has come up. This sense of dread, I think we all kind of feel watching it as soon as the overtime buzzer, sounds to end the extra frame. And yeah, there hasn't been a whole lot of variation in the shooters. And I think next shootout, whenever that happens, they're pretty rare.
Yeah.
But you've got to think that some changes are maybe coming. It's tough because Ryan Donato, like we tend to think of him too as just money in shootouts
Mm-hmm.
and on breakaways, and he's scored so often on breakaways. But 0 for 3 this season, it's been difficult. And yeah, Daniel Sprong. I always think the earlier season Daniel Sprong, I kept thinking like, well, he gets a lot of breakaways.
Yes.
I don't know that his conversion rate is all that good.
Right.
But they kind of moved away from him. Actually, we don't know who the third shooter was going to be
this last time. Yeah.
Yeah, this last one, Winnipeg. I think that would have been enlightening to know who it was going to be, who it was supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, basically going with those three only. I think maybe they got to change it up.
Yeah, and so my question is, let's go ahead and try to talk this through a little bit, because there's all sorts of different things that go into this. It's a unique situation. Like I said, this is a free one-on-one, all eyes on you against the goaltender. You don't have to worry about what's going on clockwise. You don't have to worry about guys chasing you down from behind. Like, this is a very much just mano-a-mano situation that is unlike anything else that you're expected to do for your job as a hockey player. You know what I mean? Like, I very few hockey players, this has been their expected job, is to try to win and score consistently and as much as possible in these situations. So there's different strategies and stuff that could be, deployed and used when you're focusing on something like this. RJ, do you think that you could just say like, almost like, well, look, Jared McCann leads the team in goal scoring by 8, like it's not even close right now, and he can really snipe it, like we just throw him out first? Like do you think there's something to the idea of just riding with whoever's been scoring for you anyway, or do you think that you have to kind of go with guys that maybe are known to have some deeks and make some moves and have that aspect of their game? I know that's been the traditional approach, but I don't know. I think there's something to just, shooters shoot and scorers score.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, riding with the hot hand, it does work sometimes. Sometimes guys are feeling it, and sometimes coaches will do that. If a player's got a goal or two in a game, even though he might not be a regular shooter, you'll put him out there. Again, this is all just from kind of vague memories of hundreds of hockey games that I've watched. It feels like that doesn't usually work. I tend to prefer guys who deke over guys who just walk in and shoot. Mm-hmm. But because especially the best shootout shooters are the guys who can deke really well.
Right.
You see that with like a Jonas Donskoy last season when he was just on because he had those moves. I always think about guys like a Patrick Kane who just with the hands, or we saw Clayton Keller against Tampa the other day, where you could just make a goalie look silly because you've got it on a string. The Kraken don't really have anyone like that. Ryan Donato is probably the closest they have to that.
Yeah.
And maybe you do go to someone who can shoot the puck, walk in and shoot it, like a Jared McCann, and Andre Burakovsky when he's healthy. Mm-hmm. I think could do that. But it's tough because you look at the roster and you don't have a whole lot of guys that can reliably do those things. And this is something that I've seen a lot too, because again, I go to every practice.
Yep.
I go to every morning skate, and a lot of times they will do, just breakaway drills like it's going to be a shootout. And so I've seen every player on this roster, take a breakaway, take a shootout attempt, often many times for each one. And, I've got guys that I think are, that are good and that will excel. They aren't the normal ones necessarily that you'd think would be in a shootout, but I don't know. I have guys that I would go to, but it would definitely be a controversial take.
Well, I was going to say, like, I'm very curious to hear that from you. I was going to say, I just sorted the team based on shooting percentage, just to kind of go with like my idea of a strategy of like, who are the pure snipers? You just throw them out there and they score for you. Starting off the shootout, if we did things my way, just based off of shooting percentage, it would be John Hayden. So I'm starting to wonder if my way is actually that legitimate at all, followed by Shane Wright and then Jared McCann. So
there we go. Next game, surprise of all: John Hayden, Shane Wright, Jared McCann. Next shootout.
Yep. So I guess that's the reason we need John Hayden back, just in case we go to a shootout. We need to throw him out there first, set the tone. You know what I mean, with that 28.6% shooting percentage. But why don't you? I'm not working off of all the practice information, all the morning skate information the way you are. Clearly mine may have some flaws. I might need to think out this idea a little bit better. So why don't you go ahead and give us some of the guys that you've noticed?
All right. So the first guy that I've noticed, I guess here I won't go in the order that I like. I'll go in reverse order, I guess.
Okay.
But Matt, well, no, just because Maddie Beniers, like that's who I wanted to see as the third
Yeah.
shooter in the last shootout, and he's someone who does make sense.
Yeah.
I just think also, he's pretty good on breakaways. He's
Hmm.
good but not great, but also I don't. He's just the intangible. He's a big time player.
Yeah.
He's got ice in his veins. He's one to step up for the moment. He will not get intimidated by
Yeah.
it. I would like to see Matty Beniers, and at a certain point, he's got to be a regular shootout shooter for you. Just thinking long term for the franchise.
Yep.
This is something that's going to happen. So yeah, I think he's okay. He's not someone who stood out to me a ton in practice, but I think you just have to give him a shot given who he is.
Right.
But the ones that have stood out to me in practice, and I'll just do the one that I am most convinced by. It feels like every single shootout competition he scores, he's got sneaky good hands. I will lobby for him all day to shoot in a shootout. Is Will Borgen?
Oh, wow. That would
Yes,
that would
Will
definitely be
Borgen.
unconventional.
Borgen for shootout. I'm telling you, he's got sneaky good hands. He can do he can deke, he can shoot. I mean, he just looks like one of the best players in the shootout to me. And I've seen a lot of reps. To the point where I even asked him about it because I think there was one day where they were doing a shootout contest. He went 3 for 3, and I said, what's your secret? What do you do? How do you
Mhm.
always score in the shootout? Did you take shootout
Right.
shots when you were younger? How'd this work? And he's like, no, I didn't really do any of that when I'm younger. I'm defensive defenseman kind of thing. But he said what I do is I basically just I watch all the other guys, I see the moves that work and that do best, and I just try and copy them.
Makes
Not a
sense.
bad strategy.
Makes sense. Yeah. Go for it.
So Will Borgen for shootout all day. I'll print the t-shirt and wear it. I don't care. Will Borgen for shootout, but it'll probably never happen.
Yeah.
But the day that it does, if it ever does, again, I never cheer in the press box. That's not professional. I don't do it. But man, if he ever gets a shootout attempt, it's going to be hard to stop myself.
It would definitely be for sure. Yeah, so now I guess we all have to root for 13 round ish Kraken shootouts from here on out, everybody.
He's going to
It's what
pull
we have to
American
do.
League and just end it going between the legs for those who get that reference. But the others that stood out to me,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Donato's always good. So like I get continuing to put him in the shootouts. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's good in practice. There's a reason he's there. Morgan Geeky actually is pretty sneaky good. He's got some moves. He can also shoot it. He's got a powerful shot.
Yeah.
And I know some people wanted to see him in the shootout in Winnipeg with his family in attendance.
Yes.
That's one where like the perfect storm comes together. I would have been all for it.
Yeah, and he'd been playing a good game too. Like it wasn't like, oh, he's been having an off night, so it's kind of you're forcing it at that point. Um, I'm all for it. Like somebody like him or Tolvanen, just come in, take a clapper. Why not? Geeky's case 104. You send in 104 at the goalie. Just try to go a little high and see what happens. You know what I mean? Goalie's not gonna be ready for that.
Yeah, no, it's a strategy, and guys have used it, in the past to great effect. So it'd be interesting to go. I don't remember the last time that somebody's actually tried doing that in a shootout. More of an old school thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But
See
hey, I'd love to see it.
what you're telling me is that modern day goalies are unprepared for this because they haven't seen it in their careers yet, is what you're saying.
Yes, that is exactly what that means. So those would be my picks. So my dream shootout, I go. Let's see. I'll start off with Maddie Beniers, set the tone.
Yep.
Then I would go Morgan Geeky and then Will Borgen. No, sorry, Borgen then Geeky to make sure that Borgen shoots.
Okay. All right.
You got to have him as that second guy as kind of the anchor there.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there you go.
Gotta get him in there.
Beniers, Borgen, Geeky.
Very, very good. Very good. Yeah, no notes on that. I definitely default to you instead of my John Hayden led just pure shooting
Hey, I like
percentage.
your idea too.
Yes. To make it work. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thank you so much to our sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, for sponsoring this podcast as well as the post-game lives. Got an exciting game against the Sharks later today, if you're listening to this when the episode drops early in the morning. Otherwise, I'm excited to see how they play the Sharks there. Excited for you to finally go up and see what the press box is like in San Jose, an arena I know you are very familiar with. And then the exciting games at home, again, in Seattle against against Boston and Toronto. Can't wait to see how the team looks in those ones like we talked about earlier. But that's going to do it for us, everybody. We will see you all next time. Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons. Absurdly Sane, Alex, Andrew, Austin H, Austin W, Beef, Ben, Burnt Creme, Chris, Coop, Daryl, DJ Singletone, Duthin, Eli, Emmy Chan, Gaby, Gary, Harry Legionary, Jay, Joni, Joshua, Kepler,
Kitty B. Kraken, Kyle, Leanne, Lonnie, Maya, Michelle, Nunya, Paige, Paul, Rebecca, Sarah, Scott, Sean, Shoeshine, Striatic, Tasty Kobold, Team YMIAT, Tank Commander Ty, Tyler, and Wendy. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.